Hi, this is Mike Rockwitz, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 56 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. This is a special episode as we have a guest on the show. I am your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I am joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there, Mr. Bob Lucius. Bob? How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great. I don't know if I should be pulling out a silver cross or some silver bullets. I don't know what to do.
Oh, you like my my wolf howl?
That it was a wolf howl.
Yeah. You know why I was doing a wolf howl, Bob?
I gotta think it has something to do with tonight's guest.
It has a little something to do with tonight's guest. In the fact that yes, I was doing my impersonation of Cap Wolf.
Ooh.
Yeah, Cap Wolf was in, what was that, 1992, right?
Yeah.
But our guest he was actually on the book, but he became editor of Captain America shortly, like just a couple issues after Cap Wolf. But he actually was involved with Cap Wolf, and he has. We'll have to ask him about that.
Well, yeah. I want all the inside baseball on that.
Well, Bob, I guess I should probably now mention who we're talking about. So we're going to have our guest on the show in this special episode. It's going to be Mike Rockwitz. Now, Mike was the editor on Marvel Comics in the early to mid 90s. And so he was on many books, but mostly I think the one he did the most was Captain America. So we're going to have him coming on talking about all good things or not in the 90s.
It's all about perspective, Rick. And but yeah, this is like behind the scenes stuff. I mean, so it's going to be interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned it's all perspective, Bob, because I was on another Facebook group earlier this week. Now, I know you get upset when I talk about other Facebook groups.
I do.
And someone asked a question. It was a comic book Facebook group, right? And someone asked the question, what is the best decade for comics? And then they followed up their own question in the same thing. And they gave their own. They said 55 to 65 ?
Huh.
And I know the person is asking for opinions, and it got a lot of responses. I don't like how the question was asked. I mean, I would have said, instead of what is the best, I would have said, which is your favorite? Because, people can disagree all day long, but there's obviously no wrong answer if you're saying which is your favorite. Right. So what about you, Bob? Do you have a favorite decade of comics?
I really don't, Rick. I'm a stories guy. As you know, because we discuss this a lot in the Facebook group, there are certain story arcs that resonate deeply with me, and I can pull story arcs from just about any era or any decade that mean a lot to me. So there's not one decade I don't think that means a lot to me. There's some that are sentimental if I think about it. Of course, when I was a young kid first getting into comics, I'm sentimental.
Yeah, like what? What sentimental decade would that be?
Well, I started getting into comics around 1982. So, the 80s would be sentimental for me. But that doesn't necessarily mean, looking back, that it's my favorite. It just means it sort of gives me a warm, squishy feeling inside to, think about those trips down to the comic store and hanging out with my friends and, some of the stories. I still have all those comics that I ever bought back in that era. Just some of them aren't very good. Some of them have nothing to do with Cap, but they're sentimental to me. So right. It's just a different vibe than what I would consider my favorite.
Okay. Well, that, I think you'll probably have some people who agree with you, but I think for the most part, I do think people tend to be a little sentimental. So I'm going to say, when this person asked this question, obviously there was a lot of answers, right? And people debating, this decade, whatever. But the best answer I saw was somebody wrote, whatever decade you were 8 to 18 years old.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You know,
I
thought that was like
folks.
I thought that was like a drop the mic, because that's it. I think for most of us, that's true. I think we all have a sweet spot, and generally, you know, there is the nostalgia, right? Going back to our youth. And so that time period is usually our favorite. So, you know, and it certainly is for me and a lot of people I talk to. So I bring this up because today we're talking with Mike Rockwitz, who is the editor in the early to mid 90s. And I know sometimes the 90s are like a punchline when it comes to comics, right? It was a darker, you know, it was a grittier time. But for many, it was their sweet spot. So, you know, where they were introduced or fell in love with comics. So, you know, for example, many people, when they think of the character Jack Monroe, they think of the 90s character with long hair and the trench coat and the sunglasses carrying around the shotgun.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
That's their nomad. Others, they may think of the 80s, you know, the young hothead that wore Steve's blue uniform with the yellow cape and the throwing discs. Others, you know, they may think of the kid Bucky that was brought back in the 70s as that retconned commie smasher from the 50s.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and we may even have a few of our listeners that think of the Bucky of the 50s and still consider him the original that he was intended to be. Right? Everybody has their sweet spot. Right.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's perfectly reasonable, right? I mean, that's a reasonable way to approach comics. There's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, we do have to recognize that everybody's sweet spot is different.
Right. Yep. So that's gonna be fun talking with Mike about the early to mid 90s and his experience in with Marvel at that time, especially on Captain America. So a few other things, you know, we did mention in the last few podcasts that when we get 10, the next 10, I should say, reviews, 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, that we will give away to 3 of those 10 people are going to get the What Would Cap Do challenge coin. So we haven't gotten to the 10 yet, so there's still time.
Yeah, you want one of these. I'm sorry, Rick. I'm just enthusiastic, man. I took it into Starbucks the other day, and like I ordered my coffee. I threw that coin down on the counter, and I was like, boom. And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, this is my Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast coin. And they're like, that's really awesome. And I'm like, check out the other side. And they're like, that's awesome, but you still have to pay.
Yeah.
So it didn't get me a free coffee, but damn, folks loved it.
Oh, I bet. Especially, you know, like, you know, if you go to places like, you know, New York Comic Con was not too long ago. Right. So, you know, you whip it out there, be the envy of all your,
you would have been
all your comic friends. Yeah. So, so listen, go to Apple, go to the, iTunes and, give us a 5-star review, and you will be entered into this contest. The other thing too, Bob, I had asked a little while back about, tangents. Yay or nay. And so far, you know, the response has been, oh, yay. Yeah, let's go with the tangents. It makes it a little bit more fun, a little more interesting. So I got a message from one of the guys who's in our Facebook group. He sent me a private message. His name is Seth. And actually, Seth's a friend of mine. And Seth used to be someone who worked in my comic book store back in the day when I had my comic store.
All right.
Great guy. And so he sent me this message, and he said, I say keep the tangents in. They make it a fun experience. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but it sounds like you happen in on a conversation at a comic shop. It makes the two of you feel like our friends and not our moderators. It adds something wonderful to the show, in my humble opinion. So thanks, Seth. That was
nice.
Yeah. We hope we do make everybody feel comfortable, like you're part of the group, right? You know, you're with Rick and Bob, and you're rapping Cap, and hopefully we make it a family experience for you. And by all means, we want to keep the communication going too. So there's a couple ways you can do that, right? So if you want, you can go to our Anchor page, which is a link in any one of our podcasts, and you can call in a voice message and leave that, and maybe we'll play it on the show. Or, go to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group, and you can always post on there and interact with us there too. So we love wrapping Cap with our extended family and friends.
Absolutely. And if you have an idea of a show, a story arc, a topic, a theme, someone to interview, please reach out and let us know your thoughts.
Absolutely. All right, Bob, should we get to our guest?
Yeah, let's get to him.
All right. Our next guest, Mike Rockwitz, was an editor for Marvel from 1989 to 1994. He then went on to be an editor at Wildstorm Comics from 95 to 97. But while at Marvel, he worked on over 300 issues, including long stints on Doctor Strange, Conan, Thor, Namor, many others. And then he launched series such as Secret Defenders, Silver Surfer Volume 3, Marvel Comics Presents, many more. However, the character he spent most of his career on was none other than Captain America. And we're happy to have Mike on to share his experience working on the stories featuring our favorite Star Spangled Avenger. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to have you on. I know you were a frequent member of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group. In fact, when you joined the group, you told me, I may not be an editor anymore, but will forever be a fan. So tell us, why are you such a big Cap fan?
Well, I mean, ever since I was a little kid and I collected comic books, I just love the costume. I love what he stood for. Captain America, red, white, and blue, the star. And then when Jack Kirby came back to Marvel, I'm a huge Jack Kirby fan. I have Jack Kirby tattoos on me, not of Captain America, mind you, but Devil Dinosaur and other characters, and Mangog and Darkseid and Calabac. But I love Jack Kirby, and when Jack Kirby would draw those covers, sometimes he'd draw them like just as a spot illustration. But when he came back and did the Mad Bomb saga, and there's that iconic, like, I don't know, it was Cap 196 or something, 193, I forget the number. My memory's fading. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Jack is back, and he's on Captain America, and Captain America never looked better. I mean, I love the other artists and writers who worked on it, but like Jack Kirby coming back onto a comic book that I loved just sort of reignited that spark. And I was like, this is it. My focus was on, the Night People, Mad Bomb saga, all that was associated with it, and Jack's stint during the 70s back at Marvel was kind of like, I did mention Devil Dinosaur, and he created Machine Man, but he also did the Eternals, so there was a hodgepodge of good and bad, or stronger and weaker, as I like to say. And him back on Cap was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. He made him big, he made him bulky, he made him with those square fingers and lantern jaw, and he really went out there and kicked butt, and just loved it. And he wrote it too, and Jack's writing could be all over the map. Like some of that Fourth World stuff was like, I still don't understand it, even though I have some of it tattooed on my body. He just captured the character. I mean, he's a creator. I mean, with in the back in the late 30s or early 40s with Simon. So what's not to love? And even those earlier issues, like in the 30s and 40s, where it wasn't Jack's style, it was his early style. It was still amazing.
Right.
And, I was just a huge fan of it. My first comic book subscription, when, you got them in the brown paper bag, almost like they were dirty magazines or something, the way they sent them in the mailers in your mailbox. I think I had Marvel 2-in-1 and Captain America. And this was after Jack had left, and Roger Stern and John Byrne were on it. And I was like, this is cool. I think one of the first ones I got in one of those wrappers was the Baron Blood cover, where it's like he's holding the flashlight, and it's really spooky. And then there was like Dragon Man in there. It just so cool. And the way John drew him, like the stories were great, the art was great, it was always engaging. He's a complicated character, a great origin, tons of history, like Avengers 4. Anyone,
Mm-hmm.
brought back to life from suspended animation. Just so much cool stuff associated with him that, what's not to like. So I was a fan. I'm like geeking over here, just reminiscing about why I love the character. But, and once I entered the hallowed halls of Marvel, I was like, wow, this is it. I've made it, as a fan, so.
Yeah. So, Mike, you went to the School of Visual Arts in the mid to late 80s and then got to start with Marvel in 1989. And you were there for about 5 years.
Let me correct you. First and foremost, I did go to the School of Visual Arts, but I went to Regis High School in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. And that's when I started my storied career at Marvel in 1985, February of 1985. I was a high school intern. I was in my senior year. And it was a Jesuit Catholic high school, and the program was City as Schools. It was an executive internship program where kids from public schools could get in and work at whatever job they wanted. But I was closed out because I was in a Catholic school, but other kids in my school before me had worked at Marvel. So I went to like my advisor. I was like, I want to go to Marvel. So someone who worked there, Mike Higgins, who later became my first boss as an editor, got me in. He got some pull with the coordinator, Lynn Cohen. So shout out to Lynn Cohen. I'll never forget you. I always thank you. She was Jim Shooter's executive assistant. So in February of 85, they welcomed me in as a high school senior, tall, gangly kid weighing 100 pounds less than I do now, with long red hair and buck teeth. And I started making Xeroxes and getting coffee for the Marvel bullpen after school. So I was there in 85. And then once that internship ended and I graduated, and then I was going to go off to college. SVA was like 5 blocks away from the Marvel offices anyway. They offered me a job as an editorial assistant at a whopping $4 an hour to like continue doing what I was doing as an intern. So I was like, okay. I was living at home. My folks, my aunt who I was living with wanted to move to New Jersey, but I was like, I could live on $4 an hour by myself. It was like 1985, so it's like 1986. So, and then after that ended, I went to the School of Visual Arts. I was in my first year studying, the foundation art, but I went back to Marvel when my classes were over. So I never left. It was a continuous back and forth. I was doing like the shuffle from 28th Street and Park Avenue to 23rd Street and Lexington Avenue. This was like a 6 or 7 block, round trip, go to school, do my painting and illustrating, and then my photography, then go back to Marvel and file fan mail. So I kept that going. And then I had a tough decision in 86 when Mike Higgins, that guy, got promoted to editor. And like I was friendly with everyone in the office, and he's like, hey, you want to be my assistant? Like he was a bit of a pothead, a Grateful Dead head. I don't know what the level of profanity is here, so I'll keep it clean.
Sky's the limit.
All right, well, yeah, I want to keep it clean for your viewers, out of respect. I'm not a potty mouth on air. So he got me in. He hired me, and like I continued my career. I continued my schooling, but Marvel won out, and I stayed at Marvel. And I came on as an assistant editor in 86. And the first bunch of books was The New Universe. And if anyone has ever heard of The New Universe, all right. Okay. So I worked on Starbrand, Nightmask, Kickers Inc., and Justice, also known as Javistus, because it had the V and the logo. So we have
Starbrand was great. I mean, you were working with John Romita Jr. then.
Yeah, John Romita Jr., Al Williamson, and Jim Shooter, the boss of bosses. He was the editor-in-chief, and 6'7", 6'8". Here I was 6'2", but skinny, and I was in awe. Like I was working at Marvel Comics as like an 18, 19-year-old buck kid, and they welcomed me. There was not really any hazing. I was enthusiastic. I was quasi-professional for someone who was a young teenager. trying to show up on time, not to get too screwed up on the job with the other substances that we will remain nameless. It was a bit of a party time in the 1980s for those of you who can still remember that. And I just loved it. And I befriended all the editors because I was already an intern, like making copies and just sending FedEx packages, working for Lynn. Like one of my jobs was like mailing packages to the artists. So I got to see all the artwork, any original artwork. I either copied it or put it in boxes and mailed it out. So it's a great experience. And I got friendly with Ralph Macchio at the time, not the Karate Kid, but the editor.
Right.
And Ralph and I just bonded. He was super cool. He had a great sense of humor to most people. He was he would cut you to ribbons behind your back, but that was just part of his charm. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he worked there forever. He worked there on the black and white magazines, like Planet of the Apes. So he was there for since 1975. So to me, he was a legend when I got there in 85. And that's Ralph Macchio. And he was super cool, very humble guy, never showed up to work on time, but I always stayed late because it's sort of like a clubhouse. It was like a hangout. Like, what job do you want to hang out at other than working at Marvel Comics? Because it was never dull.
Right.
So it's not like they could have paid me $3 an hour at that point, and I still would have stayed there. It's like I was doing what I loved. Like I was geeking out just talking about Jack Kirby collecting comics. Now I was making them. I was there, and it was super cool. And the proverbial kid in the candy shop. So I befriended Ralph. Ralph was editing Captain America at the time, and I think Grooney had just gotten on it, or it was shortly thereafter. And I knew Mark Grunwald, rest in peace. Awesome guy. He was he was doing the Marvel Universe Handbook. Right. He was doing Squadron Supreme. He was doing Quasar. I also edited Quasar, so shout out to Quasar. And Captain America. And then after Higgins quit, I bounced around to Terry Cavanaugh, where I worked on Marvel Comics Presents, got to know more people, worked on Excalibur, Marvel Comics Presents, Speedball, The Masked Marvel with Steve Ditko and Roger Stern. That was a hoot, like a knockoff Spider-Man with Steve Ditko. That was awesome. We'll get to Cap, don't worry. And then I went over to Howard Mackie, who had inherited the New Universe. So I worked on all the New Universe books. So there's only one person who could say they've done that, and that's me right here, baby. Like that's my walk of fame. But this is about Cap. So eventually I leapfrogged over to working on the Conan books, and then eventually I went to work with Ralph. And Ralph and I were working on Doctor Strange, the Mighty Thor, the Fantastic Four, and our best hero, Captain America. And boy, was that exciting. And at the time, Kieran Dwyer was the penciler.
Yes. Al Milgrom was the inker.
Al Milgrom was the inker. And Kieran, I think, was John's stepson, John Byrne's stepson, if I recall. And super nice guy, super young. He was a little bit older than me, like maybe 2 years older than me, but everyone seemed older than me at that point. And just young, super talented, super cool, super reliable. So I worked with him and Mark. I think it was like the Bloodstone Saga or Bloodstone Hunt or something.
Ooh, that's a great one. I
worked on that. And then Ron Lim came on, I think. And then I got promoted. And I always wanted to be an editor. I was like, I'm ready to be an editor. I'm ready to be an editor. Because I've been in the assistant editor trenches. I will use that again, like it's war or something. I was learning the trade as an assistant editor for about 3.5, 4 years. I was getting a little impatient. As an 18, 19-year-old kid, I was turning 23. I deserve a lot more. I look back now, 23-year-old kids who want the managerial role, and I'm like, come on, kid, you need to grow up a little bit. You need some seasoning. But I'd already had like 3 or 4 years of producing books, lines of books. It wasn't like I just came in off the street and was like doing touch-ups on artwork or something. I was there reading plots, working with artists, working with inkers and letterers and colorists and getting the job done. And then I worked on Cap. And I got promoted when I got my own line of books. I was like, yeah, what am I getting? Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was okay. I was like, all right, it's okay. Cap kind of tie-ins, Tales of Suspense, those kinds of things. Doctor Strange, they gave me Doctor Strange. Like, all right, cool. It's getting better. It's getting better. Quasar. Oh, okay. I wasn't a big Quasar fan. Power Pack. I was like, oh, Power Pack. I was never a Power Pack fan, and I'm sorry to those fans that I ruined the book, but it was on its way out. And Conan the Barbarian, which I always liked, but it was like a good starter editorial line of books. And eventually I worked on those for a couple of years, and then they bequeathed unto me Captain America, the Mighty Thor, and the Quasar I still had. And then I think there was one more. The Secret Defenders. I helped launch the Secret Defenders,
right,
as you said. And I always laugh because when Tom said, hey, we're going to do a book, Doctor Strange team-up book. I always make fun of Tom like that. I was like, that's great, because it was the 90s. Everyone was teaming up Wolverine. It's going to have Ghost Rider and Wolverine. I'm like, oh, really? Another piece of crap team-up book with Wolverine? Like, I was so against that. I was so like, pump up your sales by putting in an X-Men character. I'm guilty of it, of course, because I edited some of those books, but I didn't like it. I thought it was a gimmick. It wasn't saying true to the craft, in my opinion. It was a hack. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. And on the cover copy, in the corner, I wrote first unbelievable issue, but that was complete sarcasm because I just thought this was like the biggest steaming turd I ever worked on. I just didn't want to do it. No one wanted to work on it. That's the thing.
It was unbelievable that people read it.
Yeah, and it sold
right
a lot too. Well, ordered a lot. Let's be clear. Like the orders on some of these books were off the mark because it had a holographic or a tinfoil, red embossed foil cover, much like Fighting Chance back there as a prop. Like, let's emboss the cover and put some foil on it, and we'll sell more. So, I got Cap. I inherited Mark, Rick Levins, Danny, Joe Rosen, and I think Bob Sharon or Paul Beckton, I don't remember, or George Russo's, whoever the colorist was. And it had just ended, the Cap Wolf saga.
Oh yeah, we want to talk to you about that. Yeah,
sure. I have some opinions on that. And then, and I think it was around Crossbones or Cap had just been fighting some. Yeah, that I think 409 is my first official issue.
Yes, 409. Yep. We'll get to that in a second. But
I looked at them. Yeah, go ahead.
I sorry, but you're getting to good stuff here. We have so many questions we want to ask you.
Okay,
but I
remember.
I think before you got to Cap, you were doing the Adventures of Captain America miniseries.
You're absolutely right. I inherited that. I don't remember who I inherited that from. Maybe Howard or someone other editor or Terry. It wasn't something I started from initial manuscript to finished book. I sort of inherited like a first issue that was in the drawer, like, okay, Mike, you do this.
Right.
Okay. So I was like, all right. I was working with Fabian, Kevin McGuire, Joe Rubenstein, and Paul Mounts. And I think Joe Rosen or someone else was maybe
Tom Christopher was also one of the inkers. It was Joe Rubenstein and Tom Christopher. But yeah, this came out in September of 91. And it was like around his 50th anniversary celebration. Right. And so you just rolled off all the creators that were on that first book.
I remember that's good.
And because there was 4 issues, right? And then so we had Fabian, we had Kevin McGuire, we had Joe Rubenstein and Tom Christopher. And then on number 2, Terry Austin became the inker. So those inkers left, right? Then in number 3, penciler Kevin West was added along with Kevin McGuire. And then in number 4, McGuire was gone and Steve Carr joined West to finish the series. So many of our listeners, and because we asked them to submit some questions, and one of them,
I saw that.
Ralph Warner submitted this question, but many of our listeners want to know what happened for such a big changeover to the art team.
Well, I mean, was it you?
First of all, let me say to all of your listeners, thank you for caring. Thank you, Ralph Warner. Ralph Warner? Is it Ralph Warner for the question?
Yes, Ralph Warner.
Excellent question. I, too, as a fan, would be asking, what happened? what the heck happened here, Mike? And I'm going to give you the details.
Ooh, all right, let's hear it.
I inherited this with about an issue and a half in the drawer. When we say in the drawer, that means it was pretty much done and ready to go to the printer. Before digital, you'd have to bundle up the actual pages, put them with color guides or the blue lines, and send them off to a printer where they'd be separated either by camera or by hand. These were painted guides, so I would send out the blue lines. Anyone who's familiar with the artwork, they would take photographs of it with an overlay and paint it on a blue line. I'm not getting off topic here. It's all relevant. So I had an issue and a half of that in the drawer. Kevin McGuire, if you're listening, you're a tremendous artist, but you could not meet a deadline to save your life. It's so disappointing. You blew it, buddy. You knew you blew it. And nothing was more disappointing to me, and I think Fabian too, who had already had the plots written, than someone who was so talented, had such dynamic artwork, simple artwork that was dynamic, great facial expressions. He was a perfect fit for this, and he just couldn't meet the deadlines. And all that lead time with having issues in the drawer, I'm doing air quotes to all of your listeners, issues were in the drawer, an issue and a half was in the drawer. So what were these, 32-page books? If I'm not mistaken.
They're prestige format, square bound. Yeah, they're a little bigger, I think.
They were like 30 pages, 40 pages each. That's a lot of art to draw. That's about 150 pages altogether. I think they've assembled them into a trade paperback, but he just couldn't meet his deadlines. So there's only so much you could do once you release the first issue. So everyone's like, okay, we got to keep the momentum. It's been solicited. By soliciting, it was put in a catalog to all of your readers who weren't before the digital age. We'd have to get into a catalog so that people could order this. That's how it was ordered, through catalogs. Like, this is the first issue of, what is it, The Adventures of Captain America or something it was called?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wish I remembered. But and so once you solicit it, that means that people are expecting them to come out monthly. If you promise that, you have to deliver. Otherwise, you could have returns on that. So it's sort of like a contract. I don't want to get into legalese here, but it's almost like if you don't deliver, they could say, okay, you missed your contractual obligation. It didn't come out when it was supposed to. I lost business. I pre-ordered, put money in your pocket. I'm sitting here with empty shelves that I could have bought other material for and sold. So I'm returning these to you, even though there's like maybe a week late. So you had to deliver. And I was a new editor or a new managing editor or whatever I was being called. Get it done, Mike. Okay. Kevin, when are those pages coming? I had a call. It wasn't like I could text him or email him. I called. I'd send him FedEx letters. I was big with that. Or I'd send faxes. Anyone remembers what a fax is? Look it up.
Sure.
I was famous for my FedEx letters and faxes, and eventually I had to fire him. So I'm sorry. I didn't want to. Last thing I want to do, looking back, is have 4 mismatch issues of something that has my name on it. But unfortunately, that's business. The covers were beautiful, and sometimes you could open up the cover and like, oh, this isn't Kevin McGuire. This is Steve Carr. Ooh, looking back, yeah, he wasn't the right fit, but it's hard to find people when you're stalling for time and no one is answering your calls. It wasn't like I could just put this on an email blast to people. I had to call people, and other people were booked to fill the role. Like, I have work. And it wasn't like there was a plethora of talent, like just waiting to like swoop in and say, okay, I could do it. Give me 40 pages. I'll get it to you done in 3 weeks. It takes a long time to produce 40 pages. If you do a page a day, that's 40 days. And then you have to get it inked. That's another 40 days. And then color. It's almost like a 3-month cycle to do one issue of that, because it's such a complicated production. So there's a production cycle. So once you lose that lead time, you are proverbially screwed. Fortunately, that's the backstory. No blame, just facts. Couldn't meet his deadlines. In spite of our best efforts, mine and my assistant editor, Barry Dutter at the time, to just contact him and say, look, like, I don't want to have to fire you. I don't know if I was that kind about it. I was like, just get the crap done.
Right.
And it didn't happen. So we had the mismatch issues, and I have a legacy that's been tarnished already. I was barely out the gate. And here I am apologizing retroactively 25 years, but that's okay. Thank you for the question. Good question.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a fan favorite about that issue. I mean, that story.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that, I mean, I know it was a big challenge for you, because you have these different artists, you had different editors. I mean, I'm sorry, You had different inkers, you had different pencilers. So I'm sure it was a huge challenge for you.
Well, I had to get the job done. It wasn't like that was the only thing I was editing either. I probably had other books. I was working on the Saga of the Submariner. I might have been helping out with another editor on something. So it wasn't like my only gig. And as an editor, you're responsible for getting all of your titles out monthly. It's not like, oh, well, this month I'm only going to do Captain America work. There's expectations on you. You've earned the job. You've earned your stripes. Now you have to keep them. And so the pressure's on, especially as a new kid on the block who's looking to impress. I wasn't going to fail.
Right.
So, I got it done. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, we got another sort of a related question from John Christensen, who's also he's a big fan of that series. Just as I think all of us are, right? Okay. And you might have already touched on this a little bit, but we're going to plumb some depths here and see if there's any other interesting stories. He wants to know if there's anything that stood out about that series for you. Any other stories behind the stories you'd like to share?
Other than what I've already touched on, I mean, it was fun to work on because you did have a great story. Fabian did a great job. You did have what I thought was, although it was mismatched, a lot of good art, a lot of good experiences I had in interacting with all the artists, even the ones that didn't make their deadlines. And it was fun to work with. I think it was Paul Mounts on such an ambitious project where it was blue line coloring. This is before digital coloring. And there was no margin of error. We sent original black line artwork out to a special shop that would shoot this onto camera, impose it onto a blue line, which is basically like what we call a blue line Xerox now, where inkers practice on it. It was a blue line with an acetate overlay that had the black line. So Paul and anyone who did that kind of work, like Greg Wright or anyone else who did that kind of work, really had to know what they're doing. And they were using airbrushes. They were using Photoshop. So they're sitting there cutting friskets and making sure their nozzles are clean and picking the right paint. And he just did a bang-up job. The pages were gorgeous when they came in. I don't know how they've stood this test of time because that stuff kind of fades over years. So the collectors, but that was the most fun. Seeing it all come together was the most fun. And it was a relief because, I had to get it out. It was late. And so that's probably the most interesting thing that happened, or the most fun, was just the creative process. It wasn't your standard 4-color comic, 32 pages with ads in it. It was a special kind of printing, special kind of cover with embossed covers. If you notice, they are embossed, which was still kind of newish for that time. It wasn't like every book got that. So it's prestige. So I really enjoyed that experience that they entrusted me, good, bad, or indifferent. That my employers at the almighty Marvel Comics before Disney said, Mike, we trust you to do this. So
one last question I have, Mike, on Adventures of Captain America. I read somewhere that it was not meant to be in the proper Marvel 616 universe. And for those, I think most of our listeners understand what that means, meaning that, there's multiple universes and 616 is the main Marvel universe. I read somewhere that it wasn't supposed to be, it was an alternate timeline origin, but now I see it's considered canon and supposed to be his actual origin. Do you know if that's the case, or what was the original intent when this was published?
You lost me at 616. You promised me you wouldn't bring that new wave junk into this. As far as I'm concerned, it was an interpretation of the canon. Whether it's considered canon, it's like those old, I thought of it more as like those movie reels, like in this episode of The Adventures of Captain America, like in the old movies between like a 10-minute clip there before the actual movie started, like war films, like here we are on the battle lines. That's how I perceived it. Whether or not it was considered to overwrite any kind of origin or to be considered canon, I don't think so. I just think it was a nice twist on it, and it was considered that because it's standalone, and I don't think many people referenced it, notably Mark, because Mark wrote it for as long as I worked on it. References like, okay, this is what we need to adhere to, because Mark was the ultimate continuity guru. So Guru was the guru. So to answer your question, no, I think it's just standalone, not to be considered canon, and Ask me about 616 again, and I'm disconnecting. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't like what you're just going to say. It was real for being a standalone, but not like to be considered the origin to live by.
Gotcha. All right, Bob. So you want to ask him about 617?
I'm not doing it. I was going to do it, but I'm not doing it now.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, you came into the Captain America series with a very established writer in Mark Grunewald.
Right.
He had been writing Cap for about 100 issues at this point. Mm-hmm. Plus, he was a well-regarded editor himself.
That's right.
Did this make your job as editor easy, or did you find it a little bit daunting working with him?
Mark was probably one of the easiest people to work with. And I mean that with all sincerity. As you said, he had such a ton of experience. He was a boss. He was my boss and a writer. So talk about what we call today a conflict of interest people. But anyway, he was the boss, and he was giving before like assistant editor school. So I was part of assistant editor school where Mark would tell us how to, and I never paid attention because I was a know-it-all anyway. And Mark would tell us like, this is how you do balloon placements in this very like Mark robotic voice. So when I was his editor, I was already working with him when I was working with Ralph. So we already had a rapport. So the transition for me was seamless. I wasn't intimidated if that's what did it make my job easier? Sure. Of course it did. He was well established. He knew what he was doing. When he proposed a story arc, it typically made sense. I didn't have to offer many like suggestions, like, why don't you try it this way? As an editor should. Editors should not write. Editors are there to guide the professional talent. That's my take on what an editor should do. And I didn't feel like I had to be heavy-handed with them. Some things were kind of silly, and I'm like, could we tone this down a little? And he was always amenable to any suggestions because I was very strategic in my suggestions. I didn't want to come across as a bully, because when you remove everyone from their titles, they're creative people, and creative people need to be nurtured too. So if someone brings in a plot or a story arc and you say, "Oh, this sucked, this is trash," that's not the nicest way of going about business. You can say, "Oh, try it this way, try it that way." But Mark, I was working with him on 2 books at the time, Quasar and Cap, so I had Mark overload. And I had also worked with him before that, years earlier, on DP7. And I think I worked on, I think everyone worked on the Squadron Supreme graphic novel. Mark was all over the place. And I would go to Ralph's pool, and Mark would be there. I helped Mark move when he was getting divorced from his first wife. And like, we were friends. There was a real bond there, but I never let that friendship blur like being a pro. So to answer your question, sort of made it easier, but anyone could have done my job. Let me put it to you that way. It didn't have to be me. I didn't bring anything to the table that anyone else at the time could have done better because Mark was such a professional. So it's all on Mark.
So it's interesting because, when you came on board, as you said before, it was a couple issues after the infamous Cap Wolf storyline, right? And so I guess I have a few questions about that, right? So
okay, I'm laughing, but
what was the mood surrounding Cap at the time? Because it was the 90s. So was Cap considered a Boy Scout compared to all the, the grim and gritty characters and stories going on? And can you describe the comic market in 1992 and where Cap was perceived as fitting in, or maybe even not fitting in?
Well, that's a great question. 1992 was a bit of the early 90s was sort of like the shift towards Image and X-Men. So it was a huge shift. Cap was a traditional old superhero. No defamation intended here. These are just facts. Cap came from the 1930s, late 1930s, early 1940s. He survived the 1950s with some bizarre comics even written then. He was resuscitated, in 1963. So he had already been around for decades and decades. And his costume really didn't change much. There was the U.S. agent, and you had the red, white, and blue, and he had his partners, Diamondback, he had Falcon, but he was still Cap. He was still Steve Rogers, and still a guy who had the super soldier serum in him. kind of bland, not a sexy character, wasn't edgy. So yeah, there was a perception that he was old, a little worn out. Still a member of the Mighty Avengers, because if you looked at the Avengers, written by Stern and drawn by John Buscema and Tom Palmer, he was still there. He was still on a lot of those covers with Hercules and a few of the other characters at the time. They always had a revolving membership, but he was still perceived as old. At least my perception at the time, he wasn't sexy, he wasn't hot. And when Mark was writing Cap Wolf, not to steal your thunder, I wasn't the editor, but I was next door to Ralph's office, and I saw one of the covers. I was like, Ralph, what the hell is this? You know, like, is this it? Are you trying to get this book canceled? And I mean that. I wasn't trying to be sarcastic, because Ralph and I had a great rapport. We would make fun of everything. Nothing was sacred. So I felt completely comfortable in expressing that. I was like, this is terrible. I really thought it was terrible. And I may have been in the minority, but to someone who loved the character, revered the character, I was like, you got to do something different. And you know, like, I wasn't like, I'm going to fix it. You know, it wasn't my ego getting in there. I was like, making him a wolf? Like, why are werewolves in Captain America? This is like sort of like the voodoo comics of the 1970s. Like, Cap had a pretty rough run in the 70s too. Make no mistake. There was some, like, when he was in rooming houses, you know, like the Gene Colan issues, it was like moody, downtrodden, you know, like post-Vietnam Cap. He was depressed. And at least that was believable. This was just like schlock to me. Camp. Like Cap Wolf, like some Michael Jackson video or something. And the art wasn't as good as it could be. Like Rick Levins, who I later removed, was like, it just wasn't like a must-have book anymore. It felt worn out. And I might be sacrilegious now to all the fans of Cap Wolf. I don't intend to be, but as someone who worked there, shared offices with everyone, worked with Mark and worked with Rick and Danny and all the folks on it, I was like, oh, that was a pretty low point. And people still joke with me. I have good friends like my buddy Adam Walenta, who's doing his own thing. He was an intern of mine, worked at Marvel with odd jobs, coloring and all that. He sent me one of those little toys with the big heads.
Yes, the Funko Pop. Yeah.
Funko or something.
Yeah.
He's like, look, Mike, he sent it to me on Facebook Messenger. He's like, look, Mike, I got this for you. And I'm like, what is that? And I zoomed in. It's Cap Wolf. I'm like, oh my God. But, you know, that doesn't speak to the canon of the series. I think that's more of the Disney machine. Like, oh, we found more stuff we could pump out, you know, like make toys out of that no one's ever heard of that we can make collectible. Like, here's a Cap Wolf dopey toy, but that's just my opinion. But as someone who worked there, I was like, this is pretty low. And I think it was like an issue or two later where he's teamed up with Kazar and
yes,
Savage Land. And there's my good friend Nell Yomtov, who was editing Iron Man at the time, we used to play softball with. There was a cover where Cap is punching this like Triceratops, and there's a tooth flying. We could not stop laughing when we saw that. We would get preview copies of it called Make Readies. We could not stop laughing when we saw it. He came in and he's like, did you see this crap? Look at the tooth. And I could not stop laughing. And then, of course, I went into Ralph, because Ralph had a door. And I don't know if anyone's ever told you about Ralph's door. Ralph he had a gray door, an office door, where he would put all kinds of artwork on there, Jim Shooter heads, all kinds of things underneath. Put like week on it. He had a week stamp. This really sucks. It was a week stamp. And sometimes he would stamp it upside down. So this is very weak. And he would alter headlines and stuff on newspapers. And it was satire, but it was cutting. It was like you had to go to Ralph's door to see what made it. And I tried to put that up on Ralph's door. Like, this is just some of the worst crap I've ever seen, because it was so badly drawn. The flying tooth. This is Captain America, the Sentinel of Liberty, punching a Triceratops with a tooth flying. I was like, dreadful. Just dreadful. To me.
One moment.
I think someone's getting out of their Mylar bags here.
He's getting his stuffed triceratops.
He's getting the tooth. Jurassic tooth here.
Bob, did you give it away?
No. I was just speculating that you have.
Hello.
There it is. There it is. That's incredible.
Cap Wolf.
Well, you're a fan, so
the bobblehead. His head
listen,
bobbling.
I will tell you, I was not a big fan at the time. It's one of those things where, kind of references jumping the shark. And it was like what you mentioned before, throwing the X-Men in to generate sales, right? So you have Wolverine on there, on the cover, and it was a sales ploy, right?
Absolutely.
But you look back on it, and it's like anything else. It was a time period of Captain America that you can have a little bit of nostalgia, for it. And some of our listeners, now most of our listeners are our age, okay?
Okay, good.
but some of our listeners, they didn't start reading comics until the 2000s, right? Or even more recently because of, they got the interest for the MCU or whatever.
Sure.
But we also have a certain amount of fans who grew up in the 90s, and this is their sweet spot. So this is where they have, their favorite time period for comics. So it's kind of interesting where that is. But, you mentioned Rick Levins. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Rick Levins was on the book when you took it over.
Mm-hmm.
And cause you were on the book, from 92 to 95. So he was the artist. And then you mentioned, he left and you brought on Dave Hoover. And both of them have that, and you mentioned Image too, right? Image was big at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both of them have that big muscular bravado, action-packed scenes, right? That seemed to be very reminiscent of what was going on in Image at the time. Was that the direction at that time? Because Image sales were huge. Was Marvel was competing with Image? Was it the direction to kind of change some things to go more towards that look at that time?
No, not a directive. I think that's just something stylistically artists adapted to because they saw that that's where the money is. That's where the popularity is. That's where the momentum is headed. And Rick didn't leave. I fired Rick because I gave Rick a lot of chances to. I don't say it disparagingly. He's passed on. He was a great guy, but like his work was just kind of rubbery, and like not like Gil Kane rubbery, but just kind of rubbery and boring. And I wanted him to pump it up, and he just didn't get it. So I wanted to make the switch. I had worked with Dave on the Invaders. Dave was working on an Invaders miniseries with Roy Thomas. So who's part of the Invaders?
Mm-hmm.
Pop quiz. Okay, Cap is in there, and I'd worked with Roy on the Saga of the Original Human Torch with Rich Buckler. So I was getting different looks of Cap, and like my opinions just changed on Rick, and I was like, I got to make a change because I saw the way Dave was drawing Cap in the Invaders. I was like, this is kind of cool. He's like muscular, he's freaky, but he's like kind of leaping out at the page. He does good backgrounds. The women are prettier, a little bit more action. But Dave like evolved too as an artist. Dave, great guy. He passed away too. I was like, I feel like I'm the sole survivor on this run. I better hold on. And Danny Bullinati's still around. So I love you, Danny. Danny's a great guy. Friends with him on Facebook.
He was the inker.
Yes, he was. And Joe Rosen's passed on the letterer, and then we had Bob Sharon and Paul and a few other colorists. But where was I going with this? No, just
about the style of Dave Hoover.
Dave.
Yeah.
I had worked with Dave on I think an issue of Justice or something, and then he went away, like he was doing his own thing. And then he showed me new samples, which were kind of Image-esque. But we're all looking to sell the book more. We're looking to sell more books. Like I did disparage Cap Wolf as being pure Drek or camp. Sorry, I don't want to mess up my insults here. So I was looking for something that might make Cap a little bit more popular. I didn't tell Dave draw like Mark Silvestri or Jim Lee. He just did. He was doing that. So I figured, let's put him on here. Let's see what happens. Let's see if he could take Mark scripts and jazz them up and make them as, like, what would his Cap Wolf have looked like? Would have looked like? It might have looked more dynamic, because I'm looking at right now the cover to Cap 405, and it looks like Cap. It looks like Cap has a broken rib cage and he's got a blacked out Cap Wolf face, and it's horrible. But what would Dave have done? So I put Dave on, and the rest is history. And I think Dave moved it along, but we're looking for the next story arc. Like, what can we do to keep this character interesting? So Mark and I, like, we would go on retreats, editorial retreats, and kind of like talk about tie-ins and crossovers. And I was never a big fan of the crossovers like Acts of Vengeance and Star Blast and all this other, whatever ones there were, the Terminus Saga, whatever they were.
Right.
I just thought those were so painful to coordinate. And Mark was the continuity cop, and no one seemed to get it, but fans did. So I just wasn't a fan of it. So like I would zone out. But we talked about, like, let's do something about that tears Cap apart, breaks him down as a character. He's got the super soldier serum in him for how many years now? At the time, 50 years. Like, we're talking about vaccines now lasting, 6 months, not to get, like, oh, well, you might need a booster shot. Well, is this super soldier serum something that's so impenetrable? Like, where's the mortality with this character? He's already gone through a plane crash. He's been frozen in ice. He just seems indestructible to me. So I was like, I challenged Mark, like, what can we do with him to make him more interesting to people? Like, expose him for what he is. He's a man who was given the super soldier serum, and he's been fighting this fight. And we don't have to make him a tortured soul, but let's think about his mortality and how that plays in, because all too often it's just sort of like in the movies, they touched on that. And I like that, where you fast forward and you see him like older, I dug that. I was like, cool. I'm not a big fan of the movies either, but that's another story. But they're just too loud for me. So I challenged him to do that, and that's where Fighting Chance came on. And we just took it from there. So he ran out some of his stories, then we started with Fighting Chance.
So when you talk about Fighting Chance, right? Because it almost felt like, this was, again, Mark had been on the book for over 100 issues, right? He had a 10-year, career on the book. And
yes,
this was the last couple of years. And so did Mark see his time on the series coming to an end when you guys were talking about Fighting Chance? I
don't know. We didn't. We just wanted to plot out where it took the character, not like where it took us as professionals, because my career at Marvel ended midstream there with Marvolution and all that. So I didn't get to see it to the end. So I only did about 8 issues of that run or something, of the Fighting Chance series before I got laid off, or maybe 10.
I think you finished the Fighting Chance.
I don't know. I don't think so. They may have left my name on it, but
oh, okay.
Yeah, just out of respect to me, there may have been plots in the drawers, but I was given the old heave ho at the end of December of '94, and I think this ran out until early '95, middle of 95.
Yeah, it was March of '95, and yeah, they, according to what I'm reading, they still have your name on it. So,
but they never paid me the royalties on that. Marvel, back up the Brinks truck, baby. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, there were some issues. I didn't know what was going on, because I was told I was being downsized, so it's like I sort of just checked out. But I set it in motion, and then I got laid off.
Mike, you had just mentioned Dave Hoover working with Roy Thomas on an Invaders miniseries, and I know you worked with Roy on the Medusa Effect, which came out I think in '94. I love that one shot, by the way. So I want to ask you 2 things about this. One is, what was it like to work with Roy? And then second, I think I love that one shot, and it also sort of applies to, say, the Adventures of Captain America, the miniseries. But what are the editorial decisions that go into launching a one shot or a miniseries like that? I mean, what are the drivers behind that? I've always wondered that.
I thought you were going to ask me why do we have multiple artists on something that's standalone, because we have didn't Rich Buckler and MC Wyman work on that?
Yes,
So
correct.
let's get back to Roy, and then I'll get on to why that's such another patchwork quilt of professionals. Roy is awesome. Roy is a legend, and anyone who knows me as an editor would say that if I got a new book, the first person I would call to write it would be Roy Thomas, or John Byrne. And John Byrne always rejected me, but that's fine. But Roy was the man I would call up. So when I worked on Doctor Strange, Roy was on it already. I worked on Conan. I got rid of everyone on it, like Chuck Dixon, who still harbors resentments to me to this day, which is whatever, Chuck. I put Roy on. Roy and John. I put on the black and white magazine, the color comic. He was on Doctor Strange. Roy was pitching the Invaders to me. Roy, I'll push it through. Roy also wanted to do something with Captain America, the Medusa Effect. We wanted to do it as a graphic novel. Okay. But it just couldn't seem to get off the ground. Like there was no momentum with it. There didn't seem to be a time in the selling season to put it out there. It kind of got lost in the flurry of the other stuff that was being pushed out, like X-Men, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Spirits of Vengeance, all that other really chock full of excitement stuff and I mean that with no sarcasm at all. It's just like all new exciting stuff. So like, who wanted to hear about Baron Zemo and Captain America, the Medusa Effect, something from World War II with Adolf Hitler in it? It's sort of like it was like a pet project of Roy. I want to tell this story. We got Rich Buckler on it. Rich, rest in peace. Another guy who's passed on. My God, everyone I've worked with. Rich had his issues, and one of them was this is an interesting story. When he was the penciler on Fantastic Four, like he did a couple of fill-in issues, he did layouts on it. Layouts are not finished pencils. They're not breakdowns. They're like layouts. So Al Milgrom did the finishes on it, and there was a payment dispute where Al got paid for finishes and Rich only got paid for breakdowns or layouts or something. So Rich felt that Al owed him the money. So Rich and a few of his boys went to Al's house and demanded the money, kind of like a shakedown.
Whoa!
And Al called up Ralph and I was still working with Ralph at the time. This was like in '89 or something, before the Medusa Effect. And he's like, Rich Buckler and a couple of his goons came to the house, and we're like, what? So word got around that Rich is just bad news. Rich, like, don't work with Rich. But I was like, I got him on like Saga of Submariner. I can't just fire him, because that would be another series where I had to hire 3 different artists to finish it. I was getting a reputation already. So Rich got back in people's good graces. But then Rich would vanish, or Rich would get another job, or Rich was getting just too busy to work on it. So it sat in a drawer. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, we want you to release this. And we're like, it's not ready to release. Well, we already solicited it, which meant we put in a catalog. We want to sell. I was like, oh, great. So this thing that was like, let it sit, put it in the drawer. We'll keep it as a backup, is now ready to go. Great. Rich, can you work on this? No, I'm too busy. Crap. So here I am. Excuse me. I needed to get another book out that languished, and I hired MC Wyman. Who is MC Wyman? Everyone's wondering, like, where'd you find MC Wyman, Mike? I know that's a question that people don't dare ask, but MC Wyman was someone I found from Marvel submissions. Artists would send me Xeroxes of their work. Every day I'd get those. Manila envelopes with submissions, pencil samples, inking samples, lettering samples, coloring samples. So I would look at them. Sometimes I'd write a response. Most of the times I just took the postage and used it for my own purposes and threw the samples away because they were just so bad. And that's a true story, people. And MC stood out. So I gave him a break. I put him on some like backup work, and MC kind of developed. I had him working on Thor, or soon he was working on Thor. So he was a good fill-in. He wasn't like top-notch talent. I know that. He was like a John Buscema clone. And John Buscema at that point, as brilliant a draftsman as he was, and this is almost heresy coming out of my mouth, people thought he was boring. You know, like he wasn't Jim Lee, he wasn't Eric Larson, he wasn't Mark Silvestri, he wasn't Jim Valentino. You know, John Buscema isn't Jim Valentino, but you know,
Right.
John could draw circles around all these people, and he knew it, and he was brilliant, and I love him to death, and he passed away too. But anyway, so I got MC Wyman, and then I had to get a couple of inkers to do it, you know, and it just, and I think that was put out once I got laid off too. So that kind of came out, dare I say, posthumously, post layoff. It still had my name on it, and it got out the door. So that's what happened. What decisions went into that? Roy pitched it. It got approved. It languished. That was the abridged version, and we got the green light, and then I was greenlit to get out of the office. So it went out without me. Oh well.
So, all right, let's talk about that. You were laid off of Marvel, and then you took a year off, and then you joined Wildstorm.
Yes.
And which was being published by Image Comics. And so you were editing series like Stormwatch and Wetworks and Grifter and others, and you were doing some coloring for them as well.
Yeah.
So over at Marvel, they decide to relaunch the Cap series in a second volume with the Heroes Reborn, infamous Jeff Loeb, Rob Liefeld series. And I say infamous because people either love it or hate it. And you weren't the editor on Cap series at the time. You were at Wildstorm. But what was that like? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, you were still probably paying attention, I'm assuming, to Captain America.
Sure.
You knew Rob Liefeld, obviously, from Image and formerly Marvel. What was that like, seeing Cap getting relaunched in this volume 2? What was your opinion, and then maybe some of your coworkers' opinion, and maybe even Mark Grunwald's?
Well, I took that year off. I maintained relationships with people there. I was under an editorial contract, so I got paid for a year to do nothing. I went out west to visit an old friend, Mike Heisler, who was the editor-in-chief, and he hired me to be the editor over at Wildstorm with Jim Lee. So Jim Lee ran, and I, like you said, I was put on all those books. And Marvel was tanking. It was bad. People were getting laid off. The Marvolution, as they were calling people, they were just layoffs and, you know, like trimming of the fat. So I felt badly that, you know, I was happy to still be working in comics, but it wasn't Marvel. And I still maintained relationships with all the people for that year and a half. I really wanted to get back into Marvel. Like my work wasn't done, but the business side said, your work is done here, Mike. We don't want you here. Cool. I tried to accept that. I was bitter. Absolutely. I was hurt. I was bitter and angry. And I was like, well, screw them. I'm going to go work at Wildstorm. I'm going to hit them hard. I'm going to work for the competition. No one cared. This is just my ego. And they launched the new Captain America. And I was like, okay, so they made an Image version of Captain America, whatever. You know, I thought it was weak, not because Rob or Jeff worked on it. I mean, it was Rob Liefeld. He sold millions of comics. Do I like his artwork? It had its moments. I actually colored some of his work on New Mutants. I colored the first appearance of Cable. That's right.
Whoa.
Yours truly. That's right. I did coloring work at Marvel. Nice. Yeah, I did coloring work at Marvel, a ton of it too. And you know, I was like, whatever. You know, I wish them luck. Like I had a day job. Like I was making the baseball analogy before we started recording, and saying like I'm still in the major leagues. I'm just in a different league. I'm on the West Coast version of the major leagues of comics. I'm not on the East Coast version of it. I'm with the competition. I have a team of no stars that has a big payroll, and I have to work on Grifter. And I was like, okay, what's a Grifter? What's a Wildcats, which was X-Men, and Gen 13. I wonder what that is. New Mutants, and then it was DV8, a few others, and then I would go to New Comic Book Day, which was always exciting. Me and Mike would get in his car, or I would drive. New Comic Book Day was like a ritual. We'd get new comics, and we'd look at that stuff and like, ooh, this is pretty bad. This is terrible. Like the Iron Man was cool. Like Wils's Iron Man.
Right.
Was like
Will Spatacchio, yeah.
That was sexy. And I think FF. I don't remember who did the FF.
It was Jim Lee, right?
Yeah, but that was but it wasn't Wildstorm yet, or maybe it came over later. I think maybe they just started the Iron Man and Cap first, then FF was later, or maybe they were doing FF. I don't remember.
I think it was they launched 4 at the same time, right? I think they did Cap, FF, Iron Man, and I want to say Avengers.
Okay.
I think they did those 4 books as like the main 4 books for the Heroes Reborn. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But you're right. Will Spatasio was on FF. I want to say Jim Lee was on. I'm sorry. Will Spatasio was on Iron Man. Jim Lee, I think, was on
he was on FF. Yeah, you're right. You're right. My memory's a little hazy, but we called it Heroes Stillborn at the office because like we just thought it was like it was turning into an abomination, a freak show. It was like, give the Image guys whatever they want to make the books that we should have let them do before they left. Like an act of contrition. I'm heartily sorry for having offended thee, so come save our company. I was like, whatever, guys. It was weak. If I had Ralph's store, I would have put it as a weak stamp. But, I had a job to do. And then lo and behold, like 6 or 7 months into this abomination, and I say abomination because no slight to Rob or Jeff, great people, talented people. It just doesn't work. It just looks stupid. He didn't look like the character. They were drawing him. Like I said before, his costume didn't change, but wow, this wasn't a good costume change. Let me be perfectly clear. This sucked. And anyone with a pulse knew that, except for the fanboys who idolize Rob, be that as it may. So I got called into the office, like Mike's office, and word on the street was that Marvel was trying to pitch all the books to the Wildstorm studio, or Iron Man and Cap and FF. And Mark passed away. Mark was dead. Mark passed away in 95.
Actually, he passed away like 3 months before Captain America 1 came out.
Right. So Mark had died. I had just moved out to California. I didn't come back to the funeral because I just had all these expenses. I had just relocated 3,000 miles. And Mark passed away suddenly, tragically. Like someone called me and said Mark died. I'm like, what? He was in his 40s, 43 or something. And I was close to Mark. I went to his second wedding. And like I said, we were friends. Spent a lot of time together. I edited his books. Like we were close, and it was sad. And then Mike Heisler said, or Jim, I don't remember who, said, do you want to edit Cap again? And I was like, okay. I was happy to be working on a Marvel comic, but Mark was gone. I wasn't home in New York City. I was 3,000 miles away. I wasn't working for Marvel Comics. I was like a broker. I was like a comic book broker, brokering work, a subcontractor for Marvel Comics. My ego was kind of being fed, but at the same time, less than a year ago, you told me I wasn't worthy to be editing this comic. Now I'm back to editing this comic. WTF, people. I was angry. I got angry. I internalized it, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And they hired James Robinson. I be honest, I didn't know who James Robinson was. I'm a Marvel guy. I never worked with James. And then, I don't even remember who they hired as the penciler. He was like a good artist. I could look it up, but it doesn't matter. And Jim was drawing the covers, or someone was drawing the covers. It was something with the Serpent Society, if I recall, or they were trying to infiltrate Washington D.C. It was kind of a cool story. It reminded me of something Steve Englehart would have done in the 70s, but just not as good. It was kind of like retread of stories. I was like, this sucks, man. I don't want to do this anymore. And I quit. I went to Mike, my boss, and I said, I quit. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, all right. Like, what are you going to say? I mean, that was a pretty big commitment. I'd only been out there for like a year and a half in San Diego. I was a New York kid, New York guy. And Then Jim Lee called me the next day. So come on in. We'll give you $5,000 more and just stay on. I'm like, all right, $5,000 more a year. I wasn't making that much to begin with. So I was like, that's a pay raise. So they're basically bribing me to stay. I didn't last another month or something. I said, I can't do this. Like my heart was just not in it because it was cool. It was Cap. It wasn't my Cap. My Cap, like I owned the character. It wasn't Marvel's Cap. It was the subcontractor Cap. It was the James Robinson Cap. It was whoever was penciling it, who I don't even remember. And I just rattled off names from 30, 40 years ago, and I knew every little nuance of it. And here's things that where I actually read the stories. I don't remember who drew it. So I had checked out. I was on autopilot. And I might be a footnote in comic book history as like the one editor who edited for Marvel and Wildstorm, the character of Captain America, that may be it. I may be the one person who have done that, and big deal, but still it was like, it wasn't like I felt special. It felt like a consolation prize. And I missed Mark. And, even though I 20 minutes ago, I was saying like Mark's Cap and Cap was perceived as an old, tired character. He was still good. Like, make no mistake, perceptions are one thing. He was still a very solid character. He's Captain freaking America. Let's not forget that. Right. And I still had that passion for it. And then I had this lukewarm Cap that was coming to me. And I didn't have the desire to say, like, this plot sucks or you need to fix this. It was just like rubber stamp it, no weak stamp, just rubber stamp it. Okay, send it out, get it digitally colored, Wildstorm effects. It looked beautiful. Don't misunderstand me. It looked beautiful. I just did not care. I was just riding the pine, waiting for my contract to expire, get me out of here. And when I finally did, I packed up my stuff and I left. And then I came back to New York City, and Marvel was sort of, I had been in bankruptcy or was going into bankruptcy. It was 96, 97, 98. There were some lean years there, and I was just doing like digital coloring, and even that sucked. I was like, because working on old Macs then, like Macs are like super fast now, but old Macs where you get the bomb when you're doing one Photoshop file and it took you 10 hours to save. And I was like, I was making $100 a cover as a freelancer, and I was like, this just sucks. This is not comic book making anymore for me. I was burned out. So from the kid that walked in there in 1985 to almost like 1999, 2000, I had seen it all. I had done it all as far as I'm concerned. And then by the time I said, I'm done, I really was done. I I had done everything I possibly could to stay in the business, stay relevant, like I wanted Captain America to be. But I felt like my time was just like, okay, let me do something different. And that's cool. And I do think that there is a shelf life for people in business, like in any job. There's a shelf life for characters. If you just leave them as is, there's definitely an expiration date on all of our milk cartons. That's just the nature of life. And a lot of people have passed on. I don't mean it like that, but I just had enough. And I don't regret that decision. Do I miss it? Sure, but you can't capture lightning in a bottle. Right. I already lived it. I can't be 18 again. I can't be 17 again. I can't be walking in there and seeing all the people who helped build my career or help nurture me and help shape me as a professional. They're all in different fields or gone.
You're talking about, the end of your comic career, and you had started earlier talking about, the analogy of being a manager in the major leagues, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you finish a fourth place, but you're still in the major leagues.
Yep.
What were some of the times you felt like you finished first?
Well, I had a lot of those. When I was given Captain America to edit, I was on top of the world. And seeing my name in the trade dress for the first time as editor, Mike Rockwitz, proudest day. Because you work hard. As a fan, you're always like, wow, what would my name look like? Any fan who doesn't say that is lying. If you're a true fan of this, you always like superimpose like written by Robert Lucius or written by Rick Vermanis. Like you always imagine that. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that, and then here I am holding the printed copy. I did it. So every month that happened, I put a lot of work into it. I was always proud to see that. So every day, every month where I got that printed book with my name on it, I felt like I was doing my best. This is all in retrospect. At the time, felt I was at the peak. I was batting 1,000. There were no swings and misses. But looking back, of course, we have Fighting Chance, where I wasn't even finishing it. We have the Medusa Effect. We have the Adventures of Captain America. We have Power Pack. But at the time, it's incredible. It's energizing. I felt like I had the power to assemble a team of major leaguers, and I did. Working with Roy Thomas, working with Mark Grunwald, working with Paul Ryan on the Fantastic Four, John Buscema, all these amazing talents, and Tom Palmer, Al Williamson, Danny Bulinati, Tom DeFalco, Rich Buckler. Everyone who I worked with was always like, wow, I'm working with these people. This is super cool. And the fact that I'm reminiscing, I'm getting emotional because it's like, I had a great opportunity and I made the most of it. I did not waste anything. I left it all there. So I felt like I was a winner every day, that I got to swipe my key card in and answer my phone. This is Mike from Marvel. Best experience. And I still tell people to this day, this is a segue, but when I was the assistant editor on The Silver Surfer. This was like one of my first gigs. I was working with Mike Higgins, and Stan Lee was writing that Silver Surfer graphic novel that John Buscema was drawing, and Joe Jusko did the painted cover. And that bounced from editorial office to editorial office. It was kind of like a hot potato. When is Stan going to finish the script? When is John going to finish the pencils? It was always like that was one of those things that stayed in the drawers. So Stan, if anyone has a pulse, is like, wow, Stan Lee is the man. Stan the Man Lee is like one of my idols. Stan Lee presents. I met Stan a few times in the office when he'd come in. He didn't know anyone who it was. I was like, hey, Mike. He's like, hey, Mike, how you doing? So Mike Higgins, my boss, said, call Stan. And I called Stan, and I got his receptionist or his secretary. Oh, Stan's not in. We'll tell him Mike from Marvel called. Great. All right, will do. My phone rings. This is before call waiting. This is before caller ID, anything. Hello, Mike from Marvel. And Stan goes, Mark, this is Stan Lee. And I was like, I'm like, no, this is Mike. That's right, Mark, this is Stan Lee. So I was like, looking back, I was like, oh my God, he doesn't even know who I am. I'm his assistant editor. But, I tell people that, and they laugh like this because, you have such expectations of people, your idols, and then they completely butcher it. So, even then, I still feel like a major leaguer because I got to talk to Stan Lee on the regular basis on some book that he had no idea who I was. And that's a moment of pride for me that I tell to this day. And it's funny. And I have so many memories like that I'm a hit at parties. Because if you tell anyone I worked at Marvel, they're like, really? And I just tell them like a few of these stories. It's like having the campfire and no one else has to do anything. They just listen. And I just love like being able to tell these great stories, not for my own ego. It's just like, hey, this is what it was like. This was like what it was like making these great books that you're a fan of. This is some of the things that helped inspire these movies that people are watching. Like all those things, they came from somewhere, and this is where they came from. And I got to work on some of this. It was the coolest thing. And I was a kid and I grew up in it. And now I'm a grown man and I could tell these stories. So it's like the circle of life, and it's super fun. Home run.
Well, that's a really cool story. I love the story about Stan Lee, and you do a good Stan Lee impression.
That's perfect. Yeah,
well, you got people can't see it.
A lot. Yeah, I've told
people can't see, but he has the mannerisms down too.
Exactly. Yeah. This is Stan Lee. Yeah, he's very emphatic.
Well,
it's great.
It's a shame. As far as you being a hit at parties, because you're so shy with your stories. But we've certainly enjoyed hearing these.
Well, hey, Mike, another. Should I say Mark?
That's right. That's right, Mark. That's right, Rob.
Another listener of ours, Joshua Van Dyne. He was wondering what advice you might give to anybody who wants to break into the business as an editor or a writer.
Oh, Josh, I think it was a lot easier when I was breaking in than it is now. But what I did, I like I said, I broke in as an intern. So I was basically willing to sweep the carpet. I was willing to do anything, take out the trash, do people's dry cleaning. I ran all kinds of crazy errands. I was willing to do anything it took to break in. I started out as a kid because I had such passion for it. These days, can you do that? I don't know. But in the age of emails and spam, and it can be perceived as just being a nuisance. But I still believe that talent always rises to the top. And if you have a good message and a good presentation of your skill set, people will acknowledge you. And if they are professional, they will give you feedback. So the easy thing is that most people are accessible via emails and social media. There's a lot more platforms now. And I'm not suggesting you go troll everyone on Twitter and say, could you hire me? But there's a way of building a rapport with someone, much like I did by making their coffee and making their photocopies and sending out their packages, where you just say, I'm interested in this. And they could say, you have no chance. But at least you tried. And that's fine. But, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So there's a lot more opportunities to reach out to people. Facebook, everyone has a page. Most of them are public. You could talk to any of your favorite artists, and most of them who aren't complete DICKSs will happily respond and give you the time of day, as long as you're not difficult about it. Just be humble and listen. You don't know anything. That's the one thing I have to tell people. You may think you know something. You don't know anything. You may think you've watched a few YouTube videos. You may know someone who's made comics or worked with someone in comics. You don't know anything. Just go in it like that. I'm a complete blank slate, but I want to know how to do what you do. That's a far more humble approach to someone instead of saying, I think your inking on this issue was sort of bad approach. Or I could have written this better. Bad approach. How did you come up with this? Conversational ways of doing things, as opposed to, I could do it better and here's how I'll show you. That doesn't work. It would never work with me, because I would see fans and I'd look at portfolios and everyone would say, they'd always be thinking they're better than you when they never got a paycheck. And I say that to fans today who talk disparagingly about anything that I worked on. I was like, thanks for the feedback. I appreciate your input, but the checks in my name always cleared with Spider-Man on them. So I did my job, and I appreciate you purchasing the book that you really hated, and thanks for the feedback. Mm-hmm. I'm happy you bought it. I'm sorry you're disappointed, but I still got paid, and that's the bottom line here. It's a business. This isn't meant to be hung in museums. So it's a machine. Approach it like you know nothing and be humble, and you might get a break.
I gotta just, did the checks actually have Spider-Man on them?
Yeah, they did back then. This is before direct deposit.
Yeah, of course, right.
Every Thursday, every other Thursday, we'd get our checks, and all of us would amble over to the bank 2 blocks away with our check cashing cards and all that, our ID, and we'd get paid that way. It was a good time. Yeah, and then we'd party, and most of us wouldn't show up on Friday. But anyway, those are the 80s. Good times.
Good times. So what keeps you busy nowadays, Mike?
Well, aside from my 2 cats, Alfie and Cletus, I have 2 adult children, Maddie, and Sean. Maddie's working retail, lives on her own with her giant pit bull Cassius, my grand dog, and her cat Momo. And my son Sean just started the first year of college at New York Institute of Technology. So I'm super proud of them. They've grown up without ever having seen me edit comics, so good for them. And they only hear the tales, and they could tell their friends how cool I am, even though I don't think I am. And I work in the wonderful field of educational technology. So during COVID, I felt like I was actually useful in helping deliver online materials by managing teams of people who are wonderful creators, unlike comic book creators, educators who are building instructional content for all types of programs like math, English, reading comprehension, social studies, grades K through 12. So I'm pretty fortunate that I've been in that business for the past 22 years. So I got into that on a lark. Marvel work was drying up, and this company, the Princeton Review, the test prep company, I don't know if you've heard of them.
Sure,
They were looking for someone to help build test prep booklets in Quark Express. I didn't know Quark Express.
Quark Express.
I didn't know Quark Express from Quasar, but I applied for the job. I sent them samples of my comic book work. The guy hired me, and I was building test prep books with questions and A, B, C, D answer bubble sheets. And I was like, this is it. I've gone from editing Captain America to making test bubble sheets. And but the pay was good. It was consistent, and I just grew into it because then I mentioned I used to work at Marvel. And I was like, what? You have managerial experience? Yeah, and it sort of parlayed that, because when you're in the job market, at least when I was in the job market after I got laid off from Marvel and a few years after, I used to edit comic books, I would say. And this is my extensive resume. They'd always say, why did you leave? Sounds like a great job. Well, I didn't leave. I was fired. That's why I'm looking for this job. So, that's what I've been doing. And I practice my artwork. I hang out with my friends. I help work on comedy shows. I have a friend here, Greg Criticos. My cat just knocked my painting down that my daughter did. Thank you, swine cat. My my friend Greg Criticos, who's a great comedian here in Queens. Check him out. Greg Criticos Comedy. I make all of his graphics and posters and all that. I'm a designer, graphic designer on the side. And I do that. So we work on comedy shows. And I just hang out with my friends whenever I can when we're not all socially distanced. I try and exercise and stay in shape whenever I can. And, do I read comics? No. I go to comic book fan pages like yours and marvel at some of the stories that are still being done and or people who reminisce about things that I've worked on or things that I actually enjoyed reading as well. So, I try and stay off the internet as much as possible, but it's impossible when you're working from home on a laptop and you want to see what's going on in the world and you click on Facebook and Instagram and all these other things. And it's kind of like, it's like quicksand. Once you're in it, you're stuck and you wait for someone to pull you out of it. So yeah, that's what I do. And it's good. And we just had Comic-Con here in New York City, just wrapped up the other day. I'm happy to say I did not attend. Not that I had no desire to. I went a couple of years ago, but some people who I hadn't seen in years reached out. I managed to meet up with someone yesterday. This guy, John Kalisz, who was a colorist on many of the books I worked on, notably Secret Defenders. I helped break him into the business. He's still working on Batman and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And it's great just to reminisce like I'm doing now. Like, remember the days, remember this person, remember this party. So I do that whenever I can. And I'm hoping to do more of it now that hopefully some of these restrictions are being lifted and, we can do more things with our loved ones and friends. So.
It sounds like you're super busy. So I got to tell you, we're very, very happy that you were able to spend some of your time with us and the listeners get a chance to hear some of these great stories behind the stories. So it's been a real pleasure. So thank you for joining the show, Mike.
Pleasure has been all mine. I'm honored that you asked me, and I'm honored that we actually got to be able to do this.
Well, okay, Bob, that was a fun conversation with Mike. He was not shy on any of his thoughts or opinions on what his experience was like in the early to mid 90s working for Marvel and Wildstorm.
Yeah, it was refreshing. It was there's a lot of detail there, a lot of context that you don't get to see. Not to overplay the baseball metaphor, but this was a lot of inside baseball. How the plays get called and it's how the players get traded and selected, and I really enjoyed this. I didn't know what to think coming in, but because I'm not that familiar with that period. Mm-hmm. But it was really educational, informative, and entertaining.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So whether you loved that time period or hated that time period, Mike had a little bit for both of you. Yeah. He certainly had a lot of reverence for the people that he worked with. And certainly, some of the stories and the thrill of being in it. And then he was also pretty gosh darn honest about some of the material that was being put out there and, even his own effort. So that was, you're right, very refreshing. All right. Well, what's next? Next episode, we're going to go, as Bob likes to say, in the Wayback Machine. And we're going to go to the 60s, Bob.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Groovy.
we're gonna go back to Tales of Suspense. There's this upcoming Captain America Iron Man miniseries coming out. So let's go back to the Captain America Iron Man series, Tales of Suspense from the 60s. So we'll do that on our next episode.
But am I reading this right, Rick? You're keeping the listeners in suspense.
Which story?
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
I'm not saying right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep guessing.
That's true. All right, Bob. I had a lot of fun wrapping cap with you.
Okay. Hey, let's do this again sometime.
Sometime we will. Next week.
All right.
All right. He's Bob Lucius, and I'm Rick Verbanis, and you've been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.